Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The topic today is autoimmune hepatitis. The autoimmune hepatitis is a non-resolving type of chronic liver disease which is characterized by hypergammaglobulinemia, circulating antibodies along with presence of human leukocyte antigens, especially HLA-DR3 or DR4, interface hepatitis on liver histology, and a favorable response to immunosuppressive treatment. It mainly affects the females, and this is a potentially curable disease. But if the disease is not properly treated, this can often progress to cirrhosis, liver failure, and death. This is the history of major events and discoveries related to autoimmune hepatitis. It was early 1950s when a new type of chronic hepatitis was described with features, especially in the young woman, a progressive and usually fatal outcome accompanied by joint symptoms, endocrine abnormalities, the cutaneous stria and acne, and very high levels of immunoglobulins in the serum that correlated with an excess of the plasma cells infiltration in the liver histology. And this was first described by a Swedish physician, Waldenstrom. In 1956, the early cell phenomenon was demonstrated in these patients, and on this basis these patients were labeled to have lupus hepatitis. But later on, the detailed evaluation of the cellular and molecular studies, the study of the various features and other characteristic histopathological, serological and biochemical abnormalities revealed that this is a definite independent disease phenomenon. And then in 1965, the term autoimmune hepatitis was used to describe this clinical entity, and later on this was also endorsed by the other guidelines and societies, and the accepted terminology is now autoimmune hepatitis. The overall prevalence of autoimmune hepatitis ranges from 15 to 25 cases per 100,000, mainly in the Caucasians of the Western Europe and the North America. It has variable prevalence in the other regions of the world, and prevalence is increasing in both female and males, and overall this is a female dominant disease with ratio of 3 to 1. It can affect all the populations and all the disease groups, but commonly we see bimodal distribution, usually one peak occurring at the time of puberty and the second one between the 4th and the 6th decades. The autoimmune hepatitis can present in 3 different ways. The majority of the patients, they have a silent or asymptomatic type of presentations. The patients have insidious onset, gradual progression, and without any apparent symptoms at the time of diagnosis. And the diagnosis is usually established during the investigations for the elevation of the serum aminotransferases and the other tests which are performed on the routine testing. Sometimes these patients can have an acute presentations, and about 1/3 of the patients they present with acute onset, and phenotypically this presentation is very similar to acute hepatitis because of the other etiologies. However, with acute presentations, usually these patients, they can have 2 different type of acute presentations. One is the acute exacerbation of chronic autoimmune hepatitis. These patients, they have acute exacerbation of an undiagnosed or a misdiagnosed autoimmune hepatitis, and the second type is a true type or a genuine type of acute autoimmune hepatitis when patient does not show any features of chronic histological abnormalities characteristic of chronic hepatitis. And about 1/3 of the patients, they can have features of chronic liver disease at the time of diagnosis, with features of frank cirrhosis and all the features related to portal hypertension and other abnormalities which are seen in patients with cirrhosis. An important and clinically important thing to be noticed is that some patients with acute presentations, the immunoglobulin levels, which otherwise is diagnostic of autoimmune hepatitis, they may be within the normal range, and the autoantibodies, the antinuclear antibodies and antibodies against smooth muscle, which are usually the first screening test, they may also be negative, and thus the clinician may not consider the diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis in these patients with acute onset. And with more extensive and more sensitive type of autoimmune liver testing, especially for the serological markers, is helpful to make a diagnosis. And in some patients with acute onset of the autoimmune hepatitis, these autoantibodies, they may only become positive after several months later in the course of the disease, and some of these acute cases may actually progress very rapidly to acute fulminant liver failure. These patients with autoimmune hepatitis, they can present with various non-specific symptoms like jaundice, fatigue and lethargy, anorexia, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, weight loss, pruritus, arthralgias or arthritis, and skin changes and amenorrhea. The physical findings may be normal, but sometimes these patients, they can have hepatomegaly and occasionally they can have splenomegaly. And when these patients, they have developed frank cirrhosis, they can present with features like ascites, splenomegaly, spider angiomas and palmar erythemas. And in advanced stages, the patient will show all the features related to portal hypertension, ascites, variceal bleed and portal hypertensive gastropathies, and the features of hypersplenism. According to the type of autoantibodies which we see in these patients, there is a subclassification of autoimmune hepatitis into 3 and mainly into 2 types of subgroups. The type 1 hepatitis, which is seen in 80% of the cases of autoimmune hepatitis, is characterized by the presence of ANA, the antinuclear antibodies or antibodies against the smooth muscles. The type 2 autoimmune hepatitis is characterized by the presence of the specific LKM, the liver, kidney, microsomal antibodies type 1, and sometimes, less frequently, they can have the presence of anti-LKM type 3 antibodies. In addition, these patients, they can also have the antibodies against liver cytosol type 1, which is known as anti-LCL1. In addition to these two main subtypes, some of the patients of type 1 autoimmune hepatitis can have another type of the antibodies, which are the antibodies against the soluble liver antigen, previously known as the liver pancreas antigens, and this was then labeled as the type 3 of autoimmune hepatitis, but later on it was found that this is basically an aggressive presentation of type 1 immune hepatitis. So basically now the subclassification of autoimmune hepatitis divides this disease into mainly two categories, type 1 and type 2. And these are the major comparison of these two types. The type 1 is more prevalent, 80% of the cases. It shows a very good response to the treatment, and the progression to the chronic liver disease and cirrhosis is less frequent as compared to the type 2, where the response to treatment is not so good as we see in patients with type 1, and majority of these patients, they will progress to chronic liver disease if they are not properly treated. In addition to these two major types, we can have the variant forms of autoimmune hepatitis, where the autoimmune hepatitis is associated with some other abnormalities related to the liver. And main association is when the autoimmune hepatitis occur simultaneously with primary biliary cholangitis or primary sclerosing cholangitis. And similarly, some of the patients who were initially diagnosed as having primary biliary cholangitis or primary sclerosing cholangitis, they can also develop the features of autoimmune hepatitis later on. One thing to be made clear, the PBC, which was previously primary biliary cirrhosis, is now labeled as primary biliary cholangitis, and this is not cirrhosis anymore. So we can have 8 variants of autoimmune hepatitis. You can have autoimmune hepatitis with features of primary biliary cholangitis, autoimmune hepatitis with primary sclerosing cholangitis, IgG4 related autoimmune hepatitis, drug-induced liver injury and autoimmune hepatitis, and autoimmune hepatitis with pregnancy, then autoimmune hepatitis association with viral hepatitis, autoimmune hepatitis occurring in the setting of liver transplant, and autoimmune associated with other autoimmune disorders. One very common variant of the autoimmune hepatitis, which is also known as the overlap syndrome, is its association with primary biliary cholangitis. The diagnosis is made on the basis of the Paris criteria, where you should have at least 2 of the 3 accepted key criteria of both the diseases. And you can see the list of the 3 accepted criteria for both of these conditions, and at least 2 of these criteria should be present for both the diseases to make a diagnosis of overlap syndrome of autoimmune hepatitis with primary biliary cholangitis. And these diagnostic criteria, they have a sensitivity of 92% and specificity of 97% to make a diagnosis. And the 2009 EASL guidelines, they also endorse these criteria to make a diagnosis of this overlap syndrome, but they also emphasize that in addition to these criteria, patients should also have evidence of interphase hepatitis on liver histology to make a confirmatory diagnosis of these conditions. Then another type of overlap syndrome is where the patient has features of both autoimmune hepatitis and primary sclerosing cholangitis. This can occur in patients of all the ages, but this is particularly more common when the autoimmune hepatitis occurs in the young adults and in the children. The diagnosis of this overlap syndrome is made in a patient who have overt cholangiographic histological features of primary sclerosing cholangitis, and alongside robust biochemical, serological and histological features of autoimmune hepatitis. The children who are suffering from autoimmune hepatitis, they can have a specific type of overlap syndrome where they have a combined features of both primary sclerosing cholangitis and autoimmune hepatitis, and this type of overlap syndrome is now known as autoimmune sclerosing cholangitis, and this term was introduced by the group of Milley and Virgens, and they suggested that every child with a diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis should also be investigated for the possibility of primary sclerosing cholangitis, and at least MRCP should be done in every patient, in every child of autoimmune hepatitis to confirm this overlap syndrome. The IgG4 diseases, they are now increasingly being recognized in various clinical entities, and similarly patient with autoimmune hepatitis, they also can have associated increased level of IgG4, and this should also be considered as one of the variant type of autoimmune hepatitis. And you have a definite diagnostic criteria how to make a diagnosis of this variant. Another variant of autoimmune hepatitis is its association with drug-induced liver injury, and you can have three types of associations of the drugs with autoimmune hepatitis. The patient with drug-induced liver injury, they can have a strong resemblance, and they can have a strong mimicry to the autoimmune hepatitis. Basically it was this liver injury, but the features they very strongly are resembling with the autoimmune hepatitis. Similarly, the patients who have exposure to the drugs recently in a patient with underlying autoimmune hepatitis, they can also have the very similar features, and once these drugs they are withdrawn, these patients they can also show improvement in their features. And number 3, the autoimmune hepatitis may be triggered by a number of drugs. There is a long list of drugs which can be associated with the autoimmune hepatitis, and the common being are the antituberculous drugs, the statins, the NSAIDs, and you can always have to consider the possibility of autoimmune hepatitis and drug-induced liver injury whenever the patient is taking these drugs on a long-term basis. And this is an algorithm to handle a patient of the drug-induced liver injury with autoimmune hepatitis. Another clinically significant variant of autoimmune hepatitis is in association with pregnancy. The autoimmune hepatitis is rarely diagnosed during the pregnancy, but like all other autoimmune disorders, it sometimes may show improvement, or even it may show a spontaneous remission during the pregnancy, and future they may become significant, they may become more notable after the postpartum period. This is because there is immune reconstitution after the delivery, and therefore the possibility of autoimmune hepatitis, it should be strongly considered in the differential diagnosis of any patient who presents with abnormalities in the liver functions during the postpartum period. And if the patient has got elevation of immunoglobulins and with the presence of the autoantibodies, then one has to consider the possibility of autoimmune hepatitis. Another very significant association of autoimmune hepatitis is with the viral hepatitis. It has been suggested that in susceptible individuals, autoimmune hepatitis may be induced by the various viral infections, and a number of possible cases they have been reported, particularly the hepatitis E virus, hepatitis C virus, cytomegalovirus, Epstein virus, and some other viruses. The possible mechanism of association of viral hepatitis with autoimmune hepatitis is that there is a resemblance between the viral epitopes and epitopes of the autoantigens, and this may be the reason for common occurrence of these two conditions. One very clinically important association of viral hepatitis is with hepatitis C virus, and particularly when the treatment of hepatitis C virus was with the interferon, this was one of the very common occurrence, because the interferon is an immunomodulated drug, and this can induce the element of autoimmune hepatitis and various autoimmune disorders. So at the era of this interferon, the one strong contraindication to the treatment of hepatitis C virus patient was the presence of autoimmune hepatitis. And this was a challenge, but now with the availability of the oral antiviral drugs, the challenge is not so significant, because one can always treat these two conditions simultaneously, and if you have a problem with the diagnosis, you first treat the hepatitis C virus, and after you consider the possibility of treatment for the autoimmune disease. The liver transplant, which is now increasingly being done because of number of indications and because of the prolonged use of immunosuppressive drugs, these patients, they can develop autoimmune hepatitis, which is known as de novo autoimmune hepatitis, but some other suggestive terminologies have also been suggested. But it is always important to recognize this entity as early as possible, because this can prevent then the rejection of graft or for the new transplant to be made. And in this setting, if the patient gets an autoimmune hepatitis, one have to increase the immunosuppressive treatment, which including the steroids and azathioprine to these patients of liver transplant, to prevent the occurrence of rejection and other complications related to autoimmune hepatitis. The autoimmune hepatitis may also be associated with number of other conditions, and sometimes you have to extend your lab workup for the other possibilities, especially the autoimmune thyroiditis, and there is a list of the conditions which may be associated along with autoimmune hepatitis, like thyroiditis, type 1 diabetes, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease, myasthenia gravis, and so many other autoimmune disorders. A relatively less common association of autoimmune hepatitis with other endocrine disorder is in the form of an autosomal recessive disorder, which is known as autoimmune polyendocrinopathy syndrome type 1, and this is also known as APSEED syndrome, and this acronym stands for autoimmune polyendocrinopathy candidiasis ectodermal dystrophy, where patients presents with features of skin involvement and the organ failure involving the thyroid, the adrenal glands, and the gonads in the females. This diagram shows the suggested pathogenesis of patients with autoimmune hepatitis. This is basically loss of tolerance and the number of components of the immune system, the various varieties of the T cells, the interleukins, the cytokines, the complement systems, and other components of immune systems. They act to cause damage to the liver cells and results in the features of autoimmune hepatitis. The natural history of disease is basically a progressive one. And remember, this is a potentially curable disease. And if you provide the adequate immunosuppressive, then the overall prognosis is very good. And in the absence of the proper treatment, the survival at 5 years is about 50%, and this drops to about 10% at 10 years. And this improvement in survival with treatment has been shown in number of studies. The various complications which can occur in a patient with autoimmune hepatitis, they basically are seen in patients who are not being properly treated, and there is progression of disease to liver failure, and even they can progress to the cirrhosis with all its complications. And one major complications which occurs in patients with cirrhosis is hepatocellular carcinoma. These patients, although they are less vulnerable to get hepatocellular carcinoma as compared to the SCC occurring with other causes of chronic liver disease or cirrhosis, but definitely this is a known entity, and this should be considered whenever a patient has got features of cirrhosis. And similarly, these patients of cirrhosis, they need follow-up regularly for the features of decompensations, for the features of portal hypertension, and for the early detection of hepatocellular carcinoma. A number of the regimes they have been advised, but one common is to go for the ultrasound examination and estimation of serum AFP level every 6 months. How to make a diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis? Remember, there is no one single test which is capable of making a diagnosis of acute hepatitis. The diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis is usually based on the presence of typical clinical features of the disease, and along with exclusion of the other causes of chronic liver disease. Because the diagnosis cannot be made on the basis of single test, so a diagnostic scoring test was advised by the International Group of Autoimmune Hepatitis in 1993. Later on, this was modified in 1999, and this diagnostic scoring is basically used to make a diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis. This is a complex system of scoring. So this was simplified in 2008, and now we have a very simple scoring system to make a diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis. The laboratory abnormalities which we see in patients with autoimmune hepatitis, when we go for liver function test, we basically find a pattern of hepatitis abnormalities. There is elevation of serum bilirubin, a mixed type, both conjugated and unconjugated, and with elevation of liver enzymes, ALT and AST, and sometimes even up to 50 times of normal. The liver enzymes which are related to cholestasis or obstructions, they does not show any marked elevation. So the alkaline phosphatase and 5-nucleotidase, they may be elevated but slightly as compared to the elevation of alanine aminotransferase and aspartate aminotransferase. But remember, the degree of the ALT elevation, it does not reliably reflect the severity of the underlying autoimmune hepatitis. There is no correlation between severity of autoimmune hepatitis and degree of elevation of ALT levels in the blood. Another diagnostic feature of the autoimmune hepatitis is the elevation of serum gaboglobulin and especially the immunoglobulin G, and they are elevated in approximately 85% of the patients. But when patients have an acute onset, the immunoglobulins may not elevated at the time of diagnosis. They may show a elevation at the later stages, and sometimes they may not be elevated at all. The distinctive features of the autoimmune hepatitis is elevation of IgG levels. The elevation of other immunoglobulins like IgA or IgM, it indicates other type of the liver diseases. Like IgA is associated with alcoholic steatohepatitis, and IgM levels, they are increased in patients with primary sclerosing cholangitis. And when patients presents with acute features, acute hepatitis or acute fulminant hepatitis, then patient is clinically jaundice, shows evidence of coagulopathy, and the serum albumin levels, they may be markedly low. Another characteristic feature which is also used to make a diagnosis is the presence of various types of antibodies. And these autoantibodies, they are detected usually by the immunofluorescent techniques, which is mainly used for most of these autoantibodies, but some autoantibodies, they can only be diagnosed on the basis of the ELISA techniques. For the adults, the level should be more than 1/40 for a significant elevation, and for children, the elevation of 1/20 or 1/10 is considered significant. The various type of autoantibodies which we see in patients with autoimmune hepatitis, they depend upon the type of autoimmune hepatitis. The antinuclear antibodies and the antibodies against smooth muscles, they are the markers for making a diagnosis of type 1 autoimmune hepatitis, and they are seen in about 2/3 of the patients, but they are not very disease specific, and sometimes you can have the same antibodies present in other diseases. Whenever the ANA is positive, the other step is to go for estimation of double-stranded DNA, and this is very specific. Only 2 conditions are associated with the elevation of double-stranded DNA. One is the SLE and other is the autoimmune hepatitis. So if the patient is ANA positive and anti-double-stranded DNA positive, and there is also evidence of inflammatory liver disease, this is a confirmed diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis, because with the positive double-stranded DNA and a diagnosis of SLE, the inflammatory changes in the liver is not seen. The antibodies against smooth muscles, they are also seen in type 1 autoimmune hepatitis, and they are seen in 90% of the patients, either in isolations or in combination with ANAs. But again, these antibodies, they are not very specific, and the low titers may be seen in so many other conditions. Even in healthy individuals, you can find some levels of these smooth muscle antibodies. A specific test is the antibodies against the actin component of these muscles, and this AAA, the antibodies against the actin, they are more specific in this category of smooth muscle antibodies. The second set of the autoantibodies which we see in patients with autoimmune hepatitis are the microsomal antibodies, and there are 4 types of microsomal antibodies. These microsomal antibodies are basically the antibodies against the various enzymes which are involved in the drug metabolisms, and they are known as liver kidney microsomal antibodies or LKM type of antibodies. The type 1 LKM is basically the antibodies against the enzyme cytochrome P452D6, and this enzyme is involved in the metabolism of various antihypertensive drugs and benzodiazepines, and this is a common occurrence in patients with type 2 immune hepatitis. The LKM type 2 are the antibodies against the another cytochrome 450 enzyme 2C9. The LKM3 are the antibodies which develop against the UDP glucuronide transferase, and LKM4 are the antibodies against the enzyme cytochrome P450 1A2 and 246. So these type 1 LKM antibodies, they are the characteristic feature of the type 2 autoimmune hepatitis, and along with the LKM type 1, these patients, they also have antibodies against the liver cytosol antigen, which is known as anti-LC1. Another very specific antigen which is seen in patients with the autoimmune hepatitis, and on this basis it was labeled to have the type 3 autoimmune hepatitis, is the presence of this soluble liver antigen, antibodies against soluble liver antigen and pancreas antigens. Basically, this antigen was discovered against some unknown cytosol component of liver and pancreas, and this was known as LP and LP antigens. But later on, the other investigators, they discovered the antigens against the soluble liver antigen, and this was given the name of SLA. Later on, it was found out that basically this is the same antigen, so this was given the name of the SLA/LP, soluble liver antigen and liver pancreas antigen, and this specifically occurs in some patients of aggressive type of autoimmune hepatitis 1. They show a poor response to the treatment. The progression of disease is very severe, and often these patients, they could progress to fulminant liver failure or to the cirrhosis. Some of the patients, about 20% of the patients, they can have also antibodies against the mitochondrial antigens, AMA, but specifically the AMA presence is not diagnostic. These are the antibodies which we commonly see in patients with the primary biliary cholangitis, and if these antibodies are present, there is possibility of overlap syndrome with PBC. In addition to these common autoantibodies, some of the patients with this autoimmune hepatitis, they can also have other type of antibodies which are less sensitive but they are more specific, like the atypical PANCA, the perinuclear anti-neutrophilic cytoplasmic antibodies, and they were initially considered to be specific for primary sclerosing cholangitis and for IBD, but now they are also seen with increasing frequency in patients with autoimmune hepatitis. So this table shows the various types of antibodies which are commonly seen in association with the various types of chronic liver disease. And this is the algorithm how to approach a patient of chronic liver disease and the estimation of various types of autoantibodies. Another characteristic feature and one essential feature to make diagnosis is characteristic histology. So liver biopsy is must in the initial workup before the start of treatment, and the characteristic feature which we see is the interface hepatitis, which is the inflammation at the interface of the liver parenchyma and the periportal tract and the portal tract. And in addition to this interface hepatitis, some other features which are suggestive of the autoimmune hepatitis may also be seen, like heavy infiltration with the plasma cell and with the lymphocytes and with various types of necrosis. With more extensive disease, you can have more aggressive bridging type of necrosis, and with massive necrosis you can develop the lobular type of hepatitis and features which are suggestive of advanced liver disease and frank cirrhosis. It is suggested that there should be a quantitative estimation of the underlying histopathological severity of the disease, and this index and this quantitative estimation is helpful to make a diagnosis and later on to follow the progress of the disease with the treatment. And this is the grading system to assess the severity of inflammatory activity in patients with autoimmune hepatitis. And this is again the diagram how to approach these patients on the basis of their histopathologies. So after discussing these various biochemical, serological and the histopathological abnormalities, the diagnostic criteria which we commonly use to make a diagnosis, this was basically formulated in 1993 and this was then modified in 1999 by the International Autoimmune Hepatitis Group. And the scoring system was developed as a tool for research purposes to make a uniform assessment of the patients, but now we also use it in clinical assessment to initiate the treatment and to see the response to the treatment. The drawback of this scoring system that this is a very complex system, and this also fails to distinguish between the autoimmune hepatitis from the cholestatic type of syndromes. And on the basis of these diagnostic criteria, we can have either a definite autoimmune hepatitis or a probable autoimmune hepatitis, and this is the list of the various criteria on the basis of which the diagnosis of definite or the probable autoimmune hepatitis is made. And this is this classification and this scoring system where the parameters they are scored, and sometimes they are scored negative, sometimes they are scored positive. And if before the treatment, if the total score is less than 15, this is a definite diagnosis, and the scoring between 10 to 15 is probable diagnosis. And after treatment and response to corticosteroid, which is one of the features in the scoring system, if the score is more than 17, then this is a definite diagnosis, and the score between 12 to 17 is in favor of a probable diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis. Keeping in view the complexity of the scoring system, 2008 they modified this scoring system, and then they came up with a very simple scoring system which is just based on 4 parameters, which are the presence and the titer of various antibodies by the immunofluorescence or by the ELISA techniques, the concentration of serum immunoglobulin G, and the presence of typical or compatible histopathological abnormalities, and absence of the viral hepatitis markers. So these 4 criteria are used now to score the patients with autoimmune hepatitis, and on this basis the score, if the score is more than 7, then we have a definite diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis, and score less than 7 but more than 6 is in favor of a probable diagnosis. And remember, in this system the maximum score given to any criteria is +2. So this scoring system, although it is simple, but it has got somewhat low sensitivity of 95% and high specificity of about 90% as compared to the original scoring system. One other drawback of the scoring system is it does not consider the response to the corticosteroid. treatment, and now it is recommended that this should also be added as an additional criteria. And this is a comparison between these two type of scoring systems. One essential feature of this scoring system is absence of the viral markers, because the viruses and the viral infection is still the commonest cause of chronic liver disease, not only in the developing countries but also in the Western countries. So the association of chronic hepatitis with autoimmune hepatitis, it should be given a due consideration, and it should be given a proper weightage, and patient should also be investigated for all the possible causes of the chronic hepatitis in any patient of autoimmune hepatitis. About 20% of the patients, they may have no antibodies, and especially when patient have acute onset, the antibodies may be negative initially and they may become positive later on, and sometimes they may appear during the immunosuppressive treatment, but about 20% of the patients, they may remain active throughout for the antibodies. And in these cases we go for the other specific type of antibodies, like the antibodies against soluble liver antigen and liver pancreas antibodies, and similarly the other less common type of antibodies like antibodies against Pienka and antibodies against the type 1 liver cytosol. Number of conditions have to be considered in the differential diagnosis of the autoimmune hepatitis, and originally this was considered to be a diagnosis of exclusions. So you have to consider the possibility of the drugs, the various viral infections, the various metabolic disorders, and plus the other autoimmune disorders, the toxic liver injuries and other type of abnormalities in association in the differential diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis. And this is the summary of autoimmune liver disease of when you compare the autoimmune hepatitis with other cholestatic abnormalities. And coming to the treatment of autoimmune hepatitis has got two main aims. Number one is to obtain a complete remission of the disease, and number two is to prevent the further progression of the disease. And to achieve these two objectives, it requires usually a permanent maintenance treatment in most of the patients, or if the patient can achieve a remission, and then you can withdraw the treatment in a small percentage of the patients. The various studies related to the treatment of the autoimmune hepatitis, and basic treatment is the immunosuppressive, and the two drugs which are the primary drugs to be used is the corticosteroid, the prednisone or its metabolite prednisolone. Normally prednisone is converted into prednisolone in the liver, and in this patient, although there is involvement of the liver, but still the conversion of prednisone into prednisolone is not affected. So one can use either the original drug prednisone or prednisolone, and the second drug which is used in combination is azathioprine. It is important to consider which patient should be treated. So all the symptomatic patients, patient with advanced liver fibrosis, or patient who have progressed to the cirrhosis, they should be considered for the treatment. And all those patients which show the features of active disease, they should also be considered in the treatment. And there are the list of features which show the activity of the disease, like elevation of the serum aminotransferases, the elevation of serum gamma globulins and other type of abnormalities. And all those patients who presents with acute liver failure or acute and chronic liver failure, they should also be considered for the treatment. The AASI guidelines, they are slightly different as far as the treatment is considered, and they only consider treatment if the gamma globulin level is increased more than 2 times the upper limit of normal, and the liver enzyme is also elevated 5 times upper limit of normal. And if the gamma globulin level is less than 2 times the upper limit normal, then the aminotransferase level should be elevated to more than 10 times of normal. Otherwise, most of the guidelines, they have the same recommendation to initiate the treatment and the selection of the patient for the treatment. Similarly, this is also important which patient should not be treated, because this is almost lifelong treatment and patient is subjected to all the side effects of these steroids and azathioprine. So patients who are asymptomatic and patient who have inactive disease and patient who does not show the features of activity, they should not be considered treatment. And even those patients who have cirrhosis but the disease is not active, they may also should not be considered for the treatment. And if the patient is not treated, even then the follow-up should be continued, because these patients, they can have a fluctuating course, and patients who were initially asymptomatic, they may become symptomatic, and patient can show the progression of the disease, and patient can also progress to end-stage liver disease with the features of portal hypertension, liver parenchymal abnormalities, and they can also develop hepatocellular carcinomas. So it is always essential to have a lifelong follow-up of those patients who are under surveillance and they are not considered for the treatment. The various studies and the suggested recommendation for the treatment, and basically the treatment is with prednisolone. The recommendation is to start with 60 mg daily if you are considering a monotherapy, and then you make a tapering regime. 10 mg is reduced every week until you go to a dose of 20 mg, and then if the patient is showing a maintenance on this dose, you go for further tapering regime of 5 mg until you achieve a dose of 10 mg, and then the tapering is 2.5 mg every week until you are stable on the minimum maintenance dose. If the patient has got problem with the steroids, then you can have the combination with azathioprine. And with azathioprine, the American, they consider a treatment of 50 mg daily, and the European, they consider treatment of 1 to 2 mg per kilogram body weight. And this is the algorithm how to start treatment and the follow-up and the tapering regimes to be used in these patients. Obviously, one is familiar with the side effects which are related to the long-term use of the prednisolone. They are the cosmetic side effects, the metabolic side effects, the changes in the bone, and similarly azathioprine is also associated with number of side effects. It can cause hematological abnormalities, it can cause cytopenia, it can cause a cholestative type of liver disease. And this is the recommendations how to go for the follow-up and the maintenance treatment in these patients. One important feature in the management is that this patient should have a complete resolution of their biochemical activity as well as histological activity. because the premature stopping of the treatment when the underlying histological activity is not completely resolved, this patient can progress to chronic liver disease and with all the associated manifestations and complications. So the role of a follow-up liver biopsy is not very clear. The recommendation is that if the patient shows a prompt response with complete normalization of the aminotransferase and immunoglobulin within the normal limit, then the liver biopsy usually is not needed, and you will continue the follow-up with the serial estimation of immunoglobulin and the aminotransferases. But if the patient is not showing a complete and rapid response as far as the aminotransferase and immunoglobulin level is concerned, and one consider a possibility of change in the management, then one go for liver biopsies. And recently the non-invasive test like the FibroScan and the transient or shear wave elastography, they have also been shown to be a useful replacement of liver biopsy, and one can take the help of these non-invasive tests to look for the underlying histological improvement or persistence of inflammation. In those patients where the liver disease is not very advanced and patient has not progressed to the cirrhosis and patient is vulnerable to get all the side effects of prednisolone, an alternative is to use for the budesonide, which has got a short half-life, very high first pass metabolism. So it is given in a dose of 9 mg, 3 mg every 8 hourly, and then one patient becomes stable, one can reduce the dose to either 6 mg or 3 mg daily, or if the patient is not stable on these doses, then 3 mg thrice daily may be reduced to 2 mg thrice a day. Another important consideration is when to draw the treatment. Remember, the treatment has to be for a long time, and most of the recommendation is a minimum period of treatment of about 3 years, and after that, if the patient shows complete resolution of inflammation and improvement and normalization of the biochemical activity, then one can consider the withdrawal of the treatment. About 50 to 90% of the patients, they can have a relapse after the withdrawal, and this usually occurs within the first 12 months after the stopping of treatment. And relapse is when the ALT levels, they again reappear and they are elevated to 3 times the upper limit of normal, and the persons who are more vulnerable to get these relapses are the patients who are slow responders and they have a persistent elevation of their serum aminotransferases and serum globulin levels, and they have residual inflammation on the liver biopsies, and they have a shorter treatment duration. So most of the patients, they will require a maintenance treatment. And what are the recommendations of maintenance treatment? It may be with the thiopurine, with azathioprine, and once you consider the treatment with azathioprine, then you gradually stop the prednisolone, and the dose of azathioprine is increased to 2 mg per kilogram body weight, and then you continue with the maintenance treatment. Another maintenance treatment is with the steroids, and as I said earlier, you go for the smallest dose, about 2.5 to 10 mg daily, which will maintain a remission, and you always keep an eye on the possible side effects related to this long-term treatment with the steroids. During treatment, patient also needs to be monitored for the various side effects which are related to the drugs, the possibility of the relapses and the disease flares. Azathioprine is one of the 6-mercaptopurine, is converted into 6-mercaptopurine, and then this is metabolized to its inactive products by the enzyme which is known as thiopurine methyltransferase, and deficiency of this enzyme may be associated with more side effects and more toxicity. So any patient who has to be on long-term azathioprine treatment should have the estimation and the genotyping of these enzymes to find out under possibility or mutations, so that one can take suitable measures to minimize the toxicity of azathioprine. The various alternative drugs, they are also available as second-line drugs to avoid the side effects associated with the prednisolone or azathioprine, and they are the mycophenolate, the cyclonurin inhibitors like the cyclosporin or the tacrolimus. They have their own side effects and advantages and disadvantages. Like the major benefits, they are the potent immunosuppressive drugs and they have rapid onset of actions. But these agents, they have significant side effects, like they can cause hypertension, acute kidney injuries, diabetes, hyperlipidemias, and various neurological abnormalities. And the CNIs, the cyclonurin inhibitors, they can have diarrhea, leukopenia, and they can also have the teratogenicity. The mycophenolate, the various CNIs, and the various other immunomodulator drugs which have been used and tried, they include cyclophosphamide, the methotrexate, the rituximab, infliximab, and the other types of the immunosuppressive drugs. Recently there have been trials about the biological treatment for autoimmune hepatitis, and they also have shown considerable significance and improvement in the overall prognosis. One important consideration is to consider the chronic viral hepatitis in association with the autoimmune hepatitis, and especially the association of chronic hepatitis C with the autoimmune hepatitis. Now, with the availability of the directly acting drugs, this association is not very significant. One can treat safely the patients with both disorders. Initially the treatment should be for the chronic hepatitis C, and later on one should assess the liver histology and liver disease, and then one can switch over to immunosuppressive treatment if it is needed. Another very significant consideration is the reactivation of the hepatitis B in patients who are on long-term immunosuppressive drugs. So recommendation is that any patient who is considered for immunosuppressive should be tested for the hepatitis B surface antigen, and if it is positive, then the quantitative estimation of the DNA level should be assessed, and if the patient is positive, then these patients, they should be considered for the possible prophylaxis with the nucleoside or with the nucleotide analogs to prevent the reactivation of these patients. And thank you very much for your patient listening.